Hello everybody! Today we're starting similarities and right triangles, and this is going to involve some of the radical stuff that we learned on Friday, so make sure you touch up on that if you forgot it over the weekend. Alright, so what happens is you have a right triangle to the right. You have one beautiful large right triangle. And then you draw in the altitude. Remember, which starts at the vertex, creates a right angle with the third side. And once you draw in that altitude, what happens is you actually get three triangles. You get that first big triangle, you get this second triangle, and you get this third triangle right here. And all three of these triangles are similar. I'm not going to make you set them up and tell me which ones are similar, but knowing that these are similar is the first step in knowing how we're going to solve for x. So, key steps to know is that we have a right triangle with an altitude drawn in. And today we're going to work on solving if we know this altitude, or if we're solving for that altitude. And what's going to happen is we're going to do what's called a heartbeat. So, what I always say is your first step is always to trace the hypotenuse of the big triangle. So we're going to trace it. This is your hypotenuse of the large triangle. And then we go, okay, what other information do we have? And we have the altitude. So if you draw that shape out to the side, it looks like an upside down T. But what it also kind of looks like, and I know this is going to sound a little silly at first, but it also kind of looks like a heartbeat if you trace it, right? Kind of looks like one of those heartbeat monitor things, like woohoo, but like a really dead person heartbeat, kind of like this. And following this heartbeat pattern right here is going to tell us how to set up a proportion that will help us solve for x. So it's going to be a proportion. So set up two blank fractions like that. And we're going to start on the left side, and we're going to draw a heartbeat. We go left, up, down, right. And each section is going to go in 1, 2, 3, 4 order. So our first section right here was x. Then we went up 12. Then we came down 12. And we went over 16. So literally our pattern as we traced the heartbeat was we went x, 12, 12, 16, and that's how we filled up our ratio. Now, because we have a proportion, we can cross multiply and solve. We get 16x equals 144, or we divide and we get x equals 9. And we've appropriately solved for x. So remember, your tip-off is that when you trace your hypotenuse, the longest side in the big triangle, and that altitude, that's called heartbeat. So anytime I say heartbeat, I'm referring to this pattern right here. So right here I solve for x, and you're like, okay, I'm solving for x. My first step, Miss Escamilla said, was to trace the hypotenuse. Then I'm going to trace what I'm solving for, my extra information, and again, this makes the heartbeat formula. I can tell because it makes that upside down T. So I'm going to draw my blank portion. I'm going to trace the heartbeat. And then I'm just going to read the heartbeat left to right. I went 12, then I went up x, then I went down x, and then I went over 8. And now I cross multiply, and I get 96 equals x times x, which is x squared. So that's a big thing to remember, is that x times x is the same thing as x squared. It's been a while since we've seen this, so just a quick refresher, x times x is x squared. Now, to solve for x, I need to take the square root of both sides, and now you're like, haha, this is why we learned radicals on Friday. The square root of x squared is x, and we have the square root of 96. Well, remember that we need to make sure that we simplify if we can. So this turns into, let's see, x is equal to the square root of 96. Can we simplify the square root of 96? We have 4 root 6. And I have successfully solved for x. solving for x again. Remember, first step to determine if it's going to be a heartbeat is to trace the longest side, the hypotenuse, and then trace what we're looking for or extra information. This makes the upside down T, so that tells us we're going to do heartbeat. So I'm going to draw the heartbeat shape. Over, up, down, over. I go OK, make my blank proportion. Going from left to right, I went over 9, up x, down x, over 3. Cross multiply and solve. 27 equals x squared. Square root both sides. X equals the square root of 27, or simplified 3 root 3. That was a terribly, terribly drawn 3. I am so sorry. 3 root 3. I hear right. And now we might have kind of the same thing, a little bit different, because this time we're not getting both parts. We're given that total length and one part. So still we want to make sure we're doing heartbeat, so we trace the whole hypotenuse and the side we're looking for. It makes that T shape. So we go, okay, let's make the heartbeat pattern. All right, so starting up at the top right here, we went over 5, up x, down x, but we don't know this section right here, right? But we do know that the total thing is 9, and this part is 5, so this section right here is clearly 4. Because this section right here is going to be the whole minus the part, or in this case, 9 minus 5, or 4. And now I have a proportion I can cross multiply and solve. I get 20 equals x squared, square root both sides, and I get x equals 2 root 5. All right, we have a right triangle with the altitude drawn in. We trace our big hypotenuse. We trace our extra information, which is, in this case, the altitude. We see that it is the heartbeat shape. So we trace our heartbeat pattern, set up our blank proportion. We have 36, and then we went up 48, then we went down 48, and then this section right here is odd. But we know it's the whole minus the part, or x minus 36. So we do x minus 36 right here. And then we're going to cross multiply. I'm going to get 2,304 equals 36x minus 1,296. We're going to add 1,296 to both sides and get 3,600 equals 36x. Divide by 36, x equals 100. So x is 100, and if I asked you for this part, you would know that this part is equal to 64. So this was an introduction to heartbeat, and it's really important to remember that heartbeat is that T pattern that you read like it's a heartbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because you might be asked to solve for different variables. So right here I want to know what variable can we solve using heartbeat. So I'm going to trace that upside down T pattern. I'm going to trace the hypotenuse, and I'm going to trace the altitude. And in this case, I can solve for x. But if you look over here, if I trace the altitude and then trace this side right here, I have a different shape. And we're going to go into that different shape tomorrow. Just know that there is going to be a second pattern we use. And same thing right here. What variable can we solve using heartbeat? So first step is trace the hypotenuse. And this kind of gives it away because the variable's on the hypotenuse, but then we want to trace the altitude as well. And I can solve for x again. Even though x is on the hypotenuse and not on the altitude, it is still part of that heartbeat shape. So when we set it up, we would draw our heartbeat like that, and it would be x, and then we go up 10, and then we go down 10, then we go over 25. We could say 25x equals 100, or x equals 4. So x doesn't necessarily have to be on the altitude. It can be on the hypotenuse, but making sure, again, it follows that heartbeat shape. That is it for today. Let me know if you have any questions.